through Negev, and he and his wife with all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. And Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and gold. He went on his journey from Negev to Bethel. Okay, so we're going here. This is Negev, Beersheba. He's going through this little path, and this was a path that they would travel to Egypt. He's going back here, and now he's going back up to his first altar. He goes there where his tent had been in the beginning between Bethel and Ai, and in the place of the altar which he had made there formerly, and there he again calls upon the name of the Lord. So now we're going to start off. Now the story changes. We don't know how much distance or how much time's passed between verse 4 and 5. But I want to say it's probably a lot more than just a day. It's not like, the next thing. But what happens is Lot, who was with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. And the land could not sustain them while they were dwelling together. For their possessions were so great, they were unable to remain together. And there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanites and Perizzites were still living in the land. And that's the key piece. That's why I was mentioning. They're interacting with other people. And oh, by the way, the Canaanites and Perizzites, they're also nomadic. And they're also got their herds and everything else. So we're talking about a lot of things going on. And so Abram says to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is it not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." So let's just stop there. Now, what did you notice about what Abraham's doing?
He didn't want the land where they were staying to be where either one of them was. He wanted both of them to go to fresh land for the cattle, and I don't know if it... Did he build an altar there already?
Well, he's probably built, we don't know exactly if he's still in Bethel or where we're at and where he's at. He may have already moved a little bit south. But he's somewhere between Bethel and Haran.
He wanted them to have land between the two.
Okay, he wanted to have some land. What else?
He gave Lot first choice.
He gave Lot first choice. What else?
He didn't. He called them brothers.
Yeah. Think about it. He put Lot above himself. Now God already told Abram way back, this land that you're in is your land. But Abram was still willing just to say, hey, look, you go right, I go left. You go left, I go right. Whatever you choose. And stuff like that. And I love this about Abram, because Abram's sitting there and being the elder, okay, because Lot's his nephew. So Abraham's now 75 plus years old, because he left Haran when he was 75, so we don't know what age he's at. We know he hadn't had a child yet, and he had a child when he's 100, so there's a 25-year gap in there. But he's sitting there, and I love how he's just handling things. Very mature. Hey, look, I don't want there to be strife between us. I don't want there to be friction.
Do you think at that point in time he was trying to get Lot to be a little bit more mature and make a decision on some things? Because I read over in the study guide part about how Lot was sort of caught up in the day and times and
Go ahead.
And kind of like today's culture, he got kind of caught up in more than he really should have, and he kind of turned away from God at that point. But I think maybe everyone was trying to, hey bud, let me help you out here a little bit, make a decision and become something.
Well, and also he just did. That's true, and he just didn't want the strife to be in his family.
Yeah.
He didn't want there to be an argument. He was really setting out an example of a peacekeeper. You got to stop and think. Sometimes as dads, we as possibly grandparents, we got to sometimes be the voice of reason with the younger generation. And how we're that voice of reason with the younger generation really plays in our tone in how we do that. There was no anger in Abraham's voice. He was, hey look, this is not even between you and I, because they weren't fighting. It was his herdsmen against Lot's herdsmen. But he said, we're all brothers. We're all one big family, okay? We talked about this last week. Who were these people that were, were acquired by Abram as they moved down? You know, and could they possibly have been slaves to Abraham, or could they just been hired on help? You know, the thing is that they were, and you'll see this as we continue on in this chapter, about this hired on help that Abram has. But, you know, they were a big, huge family, and they kept growing. And there just wasn't enough land to sustain both of them. And so Lot, being the mature leader of this group, he just does a very simple thing. He doesn't want there to be strife. He doesn't want there to be anger. He said, hey, look, you go one way, I go the other way. And to your point, watch what happens. So Lot, the younger guy.
So Lot basically inherited his possessions from his dad.
Well, from his
Grandfather.
from his grandfather.
Yeah.
Okay, so the
Okay.
grandfather he inherited from, and Abraham inherited.
Right.
His
And
father.
then it grows.
Okay.
Okay?
Terah, what did his name? Terah?
Terah.
Terah.
So that's what I was thinking. Well, why weren't all the possessions Abraham's?
It wasn't all well, there was Abraham's possessions, but Lot also had it.
I mean, why did Abraham not inherit everything from his father?
I don't know how. I mean, I would imagine that, you know, when Terah died, there was so much to Nahor, and Lot was Haran's son who died,
Right.
and so Lot got a portion of his dad's inheritance.
Okay.
You know, and then as they travel and stuff, got that inheritance grows. When they went to Egypt, remember when they went to Egypt, the Pharaoh gave stuff to especially Abram, and maybe also Lot, gave them stuff while they were there.
To get them out.
Well, not to get them out yet, before just you know,
After he gave to him, then he got him out.
Yeah.
after a payment. But then once he already gave it, he didn't take it back. He said, "Here, take all your stuff and everything else, and get out of my land." But and it just continues to grow. We don't know how large it is. We just know it continues to grow. But then what goes on down here is interesting. Is that Lot lifts up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, and it was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's an interesting piece that, you know, again, who's writing the book? Moses. So you got to understand, Moses kind of already knows this story. So he's mentioning before Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. We don't really get to Sodom and Gomorrah until chapter 19. And not understand what that destruction is. But Moses' writing this, being inspired by God, puts us in here a little bit to kind of give you a reference to what's going to happen in a couple chapters from now. And so before Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was like the garden, and I love this part, it was like the garden of the Lord. So you have to stop and remember, okay? So let's stop right there real quick. Where did the ark land? Where was the ark rested at? Up in the mountains where?
In Turkey.
Yeah, Turkey. Where was the Tower of Babel?
Turkey also.
No. Down here in the land of Ur. Way down the bottom, almost to the Persian Gulf. We don't know exactly where the Garden of Eden was, but we know that the Euphrates and the Tigris were two rivers that was inside of the garden. So we're not talking a little garden here. We're not talking a little, you know, box garden or something. We're talking a massive amount of land. And even that image and that story of the garden, now we're talking Lot sitting here thinking it's like the garden of the Lord. You got to imagine, even now, after all these generations have passed down, there's still that memory that God had created something magnificent that we're missing out on because of sin. And so even though it's kind of like, oh, it's almost like the garden of the Lord. You know, because there's that, I mean, I didn't know what the Garden of Eden was like. You know, we're talking thousand years later.
Moses knew. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
But we're talking how, you know, it's just that imagery, realizing still and already is that, hey, it was like the Garden of the Lord. So that story continued. Again, they didn't have the Bible. They didn't have the Torah. You know, this is, if you want to look in history, this is what they call the Bronze Age. Okay, there was like the Stone Age. You know, and then there was the Bronze Age, and then there was the Iron Age. It's like that. So this, you know, 2300 BC, 2800 BC, we're talking, you know, back in that time. You know, again, you're dealing with people that are fresh, and they're learning things constantly. You know, from a Stone Age to Bronze to everything else. All this is coming new to people. Think about today. and the technology that we have today. You know, my grandparents would never even dream of this being a computer. They wouldn't even know what a computer was. And even back in the 70s, when, and I think it's a neat little article somewhere, it says Bill Gates once said, why would anybody need a computer on their table? You know, and computers were this massive room, Don knows this, was this massive room of all these big, huge machines. And what was a bug? A bug was a moth that would fly into the computer. And that's where we get, we got a bug in our computer. Because it was actually a real bug until we actually talked about it, where that bug terminology came from. But we're talking massive, massive machines. And now we got this little piece of phone here.
They're stronger than all the machines.
Yeah.
And in those days, they were cooled with water.
Yeah. So, I mean, a neat little movie, boy, is a rabbit, you can turn on. A neat little movie. A neat little movie to watch is, what was it called? It's about the 3 black ladies that worked in NASA.
Oh, the ones that figured the mathematical
Yeah.
equations.
Yeah, what was it? What was the name of that movie? It's a neat movie. Back then, IBM was first coming out with their mainframe computers.
Yeah, this lady could figure it all in her head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I forgot the name. Was it Figures?
I
can't remember. Anyway, it's a neat movie to watch. I mean, I like the technology part of it. But anyway, so you got to understand that the culture of people was a constant learning process. And so from Adam and Eve to Noah, we're talking, or to Abraham, we may be talking about maybe 8,000 years, 10,000 years. Again, if you believe in the in the biblical thing that the earth is young, compared to what science is trying to teach that the earth is billions of years old and stuff like that, according to a biblical timeline, we're only talking 8,000 years since the birth or creation of Adam and Eve. And so, Lot's sitting there, and he's heard these stories about the garden, and he looks and he says, "Oh, it's like the garden of the Lord, and like the land of Egypt." As you go to Zor. Now Zor was also down here below the Dead Sea, but we don't know exactly where because there's no map of that anywhere. And so I love this part. Let's just stop and look at this. So what did Lot do? What was the first thing he did?
He looked out and seen something that looked nice.
All right. Where did we hear that story once before? Where our eyes caught our attention. Go back to Genesis chapter 2.
Oh, number 9.
What does it say about Eve? That she what? She saw that the fruit was delightful. That looked good. Jesus says that, hey, if you look at a woman wrong, you've already committed adultery. Our eyes are very deceptive. We sit there and we look at things and we perceive things, and all of a sudden it starts to initiate all kinds of little thoughts in our minds. And if our eyes are not godly, they can lead us off to all kinds of directions. Hey, that new job, we don't pray about it, that new job looks really good. I make more money, I can move up the ladder, whatever. And we can see these things, and then it begins to initiate thoughts in our minds. And if God's not really controlling our mind, our eyes are a wide open door to just going down the wrong path. Now see, Lot had already heard. He already knew why they were in Canaan. God had promised this land to Abram. But Lot, instead of trying to just move south and stay in Canaan, he decides that what he's going to do is he's going to go from here and he's going to live on the other side of the Jordan River, on the other side of the Dead Sea, because the land looked fertile. The land looks good. It's almost like the Garden of Eden. Now I don't know. We don't know if he already knew the sinfulness of Sodom and Gomorrah, but you'll find out that as he gets here, he takes off. So Lot chooses for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward, and thus they separated from each other. So he takes off, and he decides he's going to go down here where greener pastures are. Because, oh, by the way, these greener pastures look also as good as over here in Egypt. And so what's happening here in Egypt? Because we're going to see this in Exodus.
So Abraham didn't go to the left.
uh-uh.
He stayed.
He stayed.
Okay.
He stayed, and Abraham and Lot took off. But just kind of curiosity, again, a little geography. I don't know if anybody ever gets into geography. What river in the United States flows north? There's actually several of them, but there's one in Florida and there's one in North Carolina. That starts in North Carolina.
The
New River.
New River.
You ever think about that? The New River starts in the mountains of North Carolina and travels all the way up to West Virginia, northward. Here, there's this river. It starts way down in Africa, and it goes up, and there's falls and stuff like that. There's a lot of other rivers, like the Mississippi River, and stuff like that. But it goes up here, and when it gets to Egypt and comes out into the Mediterranean,
I mean, the Nile.
yeah, the Nile River.
Yeah.
And so there's this land that the Israelites are going to come to, and the Pharaoh's going to allow them to live. This is before that they become slaves, and they live in this Goshen land, a fertile land. So Lot's seeing this land like Egypt, like Zoar, and sort of he's seeing all this greenery and everything else. And oh, it's great, man! I'm going to go there, and everything will be great. But he forgets. Also, in the sense of that lust for going something, just realizing that where God's blessing is going to be. And so he takes off. And he leaves God's blessing. And it's not, well, that's not a deceitful person. You're going to see this later on. God still takes care of Lot. But what happens is Lot takes off. And he's not much of a witness, as we'll get to in chapter 19. He's not much of a witness to this group of people down here. In fact, he's really conforming in a lot of different ways. And unfortunately, as you'll see later on, what his daughters do. But so Lot chooses for himself in the valley of Jordan, and Lot journeyed to eastward, and they separated from each other. Now, Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities near the valley, and moved, guess what? And moved his tents as far as Sodom. So he's just creeping into that area. Then the men of Sodom were wicked, exceedingly, and sinners against the Lord. Again, this is Moses, kind of leading up to what we're going to read about later on. And now the Lord says, verse 14, now the Lord says to Abram, after Lot has separated him, now lift up your eyes, look from place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. All the land that you see, I give to you and your descendants. This goes all the way back. Remember, chapter 12, that promise was already given to Abram. So this is all your land. So God is now reaffirming this. Okay? He's reaffirming to Abram. He says, all this land is yours, and I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that anyone can count the dust of the earth. Then your descendants will also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land from its length to its breadth. I give it to you. And then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt in the oaks of Mamre, which are in Herdsman, and he built an altar to the Lord there. So he was up here between Bethel and Ai. We don't know exactly where he was, but I'm going to assume he wasn't up here. He's probably around Salem or below Salem in this area before he gets to Herdsman. But they're sitting on a mountainside, and they're looking down at the Dead Sea, and they're seeing the greenery and everything else from a high peak. And he's seeing as Lot takes off because of that. Abram sits here, and now he moves down here to Hebron, and he builds another altar to the Lord. And again, that is that milestone, that was missing when he went off to Egypt. Now Abram is going back to, again, keeping up with God, making sure that he's in a right relationship with God. Any questions? Maybe we will get a little bit further. All right. I don't know if we're going to get to Melchizedek. We're going to read about this next section. So we're going to talk about the wars of the kings. Now what's happened is there's a lot of names here, and I'll probably mispronounce every one of them. But I want you to kind of understand where these kings are coming from. So let's kind of start off.
Something that kind of struck out to me, Marty, was that Lot didn't have to leave.
No, he really didn't. He probably, yes, he did in some way. They couldn't stay together.
Right.
Because the land wouldn't survive. But Lot didn't have to leave Canaan.
His own pride made him want to leave Canaan. He wanted his own place,
Yeah,
in a sense.
yeah. I mean, he could have.
They could have just said, well, I want to stay with you.
Yeah, he could have. Or he said, hey, let me just go north. You know, let me go somewhere else. But, you know, he saw this, he saw this land being so green, so fertile and everything else. And he goes, wow.
But when God came to Abram, I mean, they're seeing the same thing. They're seeing that same land that Lot went to.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's what he
again,
did about-
like I said, I don't believe Israel was a desert or is like, the pictures that we see today of Israel where it's very arid and dry. I know, down here, so this ends here. There's this little Mount Sinai area where the Mount Sinai is down here, the peninsula before you get to Egypt and everything else. We know this is a total desert right now, and stuff like that. I can't even tell you. And when the Exodus happens, they end up traveling all around this, for 40 years. It could have took them a couple of days or a week or so to get from here to here in a heartbeat. Abram travels from here to Egypt, and we're not talking a major distance of time. We're not talking 40 years, but it took the Hebrews, 40 years because they kept rebelling against God before they ever get back into before they actually get back into the land of Israel. And then they cross over here, and they're over here, and then they come in over here where Jericho's at, a little bit above here, and then that's where they begin to cross over. But yeah, he didn't have to choose. He didn't have to choose that area. He could have stayed in the land of Canaan and just went north.
Or he could have stayed with Abraham. Could not went anywhere.
Well, but again, their herdsmen were fighting against Israel, so they had to have some separation. He couldn't stay with them. He may not have to travel as far to get there.
Okay.
He did have to. They did have to separate.
They needed to split.
Huh?
They needed to split.
They needed to split because their herdsmen were fighting and there wasn't enough land.
You think he went there because of the water?
I think he went there because exactly what it says. He saw this land being like the Garden of Eden. He saw it being rich and green and everything else, and he thought he was, there. I'll just multiply my property and everything else. Things will be really good. Look at this, man. It's great. Why do I want to stay up here? Down there it's a little bit more flatter and everything else, and things are just like neat. Let me go down there. So I think with his eyes, he just saw the greenery. He saw all the benefits of the land. He wasn't thinking about the promises of God.
He saw the neon signs.
Yeah, but again, like I tell you, there's every time you point a finger at one person, there's three fingers pointing back at you. How do we fit in that same pattern? Do we sometimes see things that we think are good and really take it before we take it to the Lord and go, man, that looks great. I want to jump on that. Okay, I'll get you later. And we jump on things because our eyes, our lust, our greed, our pride goes after it. It says, hey, I'm going to go do this. And before we actually take it to the Lord, it says, Lot's just sitting there looking, hey, this looks really great. I'll just go here. But here's what happens. And it gets him in trouble. So we'll start off from chapter 14. And it came about in the days of Amphrael, the king of Shinar. Okay, so Shinar, I can tell you exactly what that means. Shinar is Babylon. So now think about this. Babylon's way up here, down here to the Euphrates River, below Nineveh, and there's Babylon. So kind of get an idea of where these kings and their kingdoms are. But so you have this king, Amphrael, the king of Shinar, which is Babylon. Arioch, the king of Eslar. Then there's, I call him Ched, but Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, the king of Golan. And they all made war with Bera, the king of Sodom, with Bershah, the king of Gomorrah, thank you, Shinab, the king of Adam. I told you I'm not the greatest at pronouncing things. And Shember, the king of Zebulun, and the king of Belel, which is also Zor. And all these came as allies to the valley of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. So in other words, down here at the bottom, when you look at this fertile land, it's real flat also. And so they're coming down to that flat valley below the Dead Sea. Now, when you look at Google Maps, you'll see there's a lot of mountain ranges. There's the Mediterranean. There's a lot of mountain ranges here, and then it drops down, and then you have the Jordan River. So this is the Sea of Galilee. This is the Dead Sea, and I never researched it yet, but I'm not. When I keep thinking about it, I want to do it. How's all this water flow in the Dead Sea and it doesn't go anywhere else? Kind of weird. I want to research that. But all this water is flowing down the Jordan and stops in the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is what?
Dead.
It was the Dead Sea because of salt, which we have a lake like that in the United States. It's called what? Salt Lake, Utah. So there's a big, huge lake in Utah. Salt Lake is very much like the Dead Sea. It's a big, huge, very thick water, salty water. I mean, this is even
fish or anything like that.
not that I know of,
Right.
and oh, by the way, as you're going to see, there's a lot of tar pits, in this valley down here also. So you got to kind of stop and think about, oil and everything else in the tar pits. But there's, we'll see that here in a minute. But they're down in this valley. They're going to come down this valley. Now here's the interesting thing. Just kind of give you a little geography. You have all these kings up in here, and there's a in the Bible Atlas, they say there's a road or a pathway they call the King's Highway that would follow along up here, go through Hiram, and wouldn't go into Israel, but it follows on this side of the Jordan and comes down and then crosses over here into Egypt. And there's a trade path between Egypt and Nineveh and Babylon and Ur and all that. So it's what they call the King's Highway.
That's right here, if you want to see it.
Okay, yeah, I looked at the same map. So yeah, if you want to look at it, look at there.
The black line?
And so,
The green line? Yeah.
and then there's also other little pathways that cuts in here, and I think this is probably the pathway that probably most likely Abram took. There's another pathway that comes in and pretty much follows this line here and goes all the way down through Beersheba into Egypt. And then there's another trade route that goes along the coast of Israel, and Gaza Strip is like right here and goes into Egypt. But anyhow, these kings, they all formed together, and what happened is these kings down here around the Dead Sea were supposed to be paying tithes or paying their little fees to these big kings that were kind of controlling all the land. And what happened is for 13 years they've been doing that, but then all of a sudden they stopped doing that. Well, these kings up here didn't like that idea, so they come down, 5 of them join together, and they come to fight down these kings down here. And so they come down to this valley and have this little battle. So let's watch what happens in the battle. So, for 12 years they have served, and we're going to call them Ched for short. They've been serving Ched, but on the 13th year they rebelled. So in the 14th year of Ched, and the kings that were with them, they came to defeat the Rephaim. Now guess what? Who's the Rephaim? Huh? No, not yet.
That's coming up.
There was who was it in Genesis chapter 6? They were called the Nephilim. Remember who they were?
They were large people.
Large people. Well, you'll see in the Bible, Rephaim are also a group of large people. Okay, so here was these large people that were down here in the Dead Sea area, and so they come on the 14th year. Ched and all of his friends, they were with him, came down and defeated the Rephaims in the Ashatite, whatever last. Oh gosh, I hate names. And Zim and Ham and da 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 da. So you can read those things. I'm going to tear it up, and I hate tearing things up, which we're in the wilderness. Then they turned back and came up to Mizpah and conquered all the country land of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived there. And the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zebulun and the king of Bela, which is Zor, came out, and they arrayed for a battle against them in the valley of Sinim. Okay, that's that lower valley. Against Ched and his friends. I'm going to stop there. Those 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits. So the kings of Solomon and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. But those who survived fled into the hillside, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed along with them. So here they come, Ched and his little buddies, they come all the way down here, come down here to fight these 5 kings down here. Okay, 4 kings against 5. They defeated them. The other kings are just running off. We're not talking major. Probably Ched and his group is a bigger army than these guys. And I want you to pay attention to that when we get here in a few minutes. But they come down here and they defeat these guys. And these guys are running off, and some run into a tar pit, and that was the end of them. Some didn't get to the tar pit and fled off into the hills. And so then Ched and his buddies, they went and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and their food supply. And they also took, guess who? Who has a lot of livestock and everything else. They took Lot, Abraham's nephew, and his possessions and departed, and that was living in Sodom. Then a fugitive came and told Abram the what?
Hebrew.
That's the first time that's ever mentioned in Scripture. That's the first time you hear. In Hebrew, goes back to Eber, who was the son of Shem. Okay, or genealogy. So, that's where we get this Hebrew word. But Abram the Hebrew, because he was known as Abram, the son of Abram, or Hebrew, because he was of that lineage, and he was living in with all the relatives of Ham, who were the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Amalekites. And so they named him that way. And so he was living there by the oaks of the Amorites, and his brother Eshcol and his brother Anar, and the other allies with Abram. And so this whole story about this war probably would never be mentioned at all in Scripture if it wasn't for Lot.
Taking Lot.
Yeah. Because there's probably a lot of battles going on during this time. If you go back and look at different history books and you read the different histories about this whole Babylon region and everything else, there's all kinds of battles going on. This battle in the Bible probably would have never been recorded at all if it wasn't for Lot. And it's a key piece to remember that God still looked after his own. I love the verse in John 10:10 that says, nothing can snatch you out of God's hands. When God has you in his hands, nothing's going to snatch you out. God's going to take care of you. It doesn't mean you're not going to run off and do some crazy things like I did in my life, but God's never going to lose you. And God wasn't going to lose Lot. And so what happens is one of his herdsmen escapes all this stuff, and he runs back to Abram, and he tells Abram what's going on. Then a fugitive came and told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was living in this area around the big oaks, and Abram heard, verse 14, Abram heard this about his relative being taken captive and led out, and he led out with his trained men, born in his house, 318. Now think about this.
We thought Ross had a lot of kids.
Yeah.
Who was Ross?
318 men, trained men, the herdsmen, of Abraham's household, and he went in pursuit as far as Dan. We're talking now up here. Okay, so Ched and his buddies, they're traveling back up here. Abram's heading up this way, and he meets them up here as far as Dan. He divides his forces against them by night, and he and his servants defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah and north Damascus. Now Damascus, where's Damascus today?
Syria.
Yep, Syria. So we're talking further up this wild. This is really Israel. If you ever really, again, look at the map, Israel is a very small country compared to a lot of the other countries. Yeah. And so they're, all the way up as far as Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and he also brought back his relative Lot with him in his possessions, and all the women and the people.
He called him brother again right there.
Yep. So and the whole key is one, it's how God takes care of his own. But I think it's kind of cool about Abram. Abram wasn't going to lose his nephew. His nephew's been with him. His nephew believed him and trusted him as they went into the land of Canaan. and along with the 318 men that were with him, and all those people that were his herdsmen and stuff like that. So again, we're not talking a small little family here. We're talking a big family, yet still childless. But he's got his herdsmen, trained herdsmen, to go fight off 4 kings that defeated 5 kings down here, 318 men plus Abram. We're not talking, and plus Abram's what? Around about 85 years of age? You know, I know there's life after 60.
Don't ever mess with old man.
Don't mess with this old man. Hey, I need to lose some more weight. But Abram takes off with 300 of his trained men, and they go up and they defeat these kings, Ched and his buddies.
Herd them like cattle.
Huh?
Herd them like cattle.
Yeah.
They surround them at night.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got him by night, divided his group up, his 318 by night, divided them up and attacked them. You know, Ched had no idea who Abram was. Had no idea, didn't have an idea. And not only that, but then they chased him. You know, so now Ched's on the run, and he goes from Dan all the way up to Damascus and keeps going back up. He's running. I don't want to be a part of this guy. You know what? It wasn't Abram and the 318 men that did it. It was God. Because God does protection. And you'll see this as we continue to go through the Old Testament, how God does miraculous battles and helps people who follow him win battles when all the odds are against them. You know, this is the faith of Abram. Now again, we're going to talk about this, and we'll continue talking about it. We're not talking like this mighty man of faith, because we've already saw that, hey, he screwed up one time by lying about his wife and going to Egypt. We're going to see this thing again in chapter 20. You know, Abram's on a journey like all of us in growing in his faith. But you're going to find out that God continues to talk to him. God continues to encourage him. Just like when Lot left him, God says, hey, look, Abram, that's okay. He chooses to go down here. You're still here. And I'm giving you all this land. Your descendants. And not only am I giving it to your descendants, your descendants are going to grow so much that they're going to be like the sand of the sea in the shores. If you can count the grains of sand, you can count his descendants. In other words, you're not going to be able to count them, period. You know, and we're going to see God constantly reminding Abram all the way through this. So I don't want to get too far down here, because I probably want to stop right here, because I want to go into we'll pick up at 17 in chapter 14, and then we'll talk in maybe a week or I guess 2 weeks about Melchizedek. And I go and do me a favor. I mean,